Well, hi, my name is Jason T. Ingram. I go by the artist name of Fake Zappa. I am proudly, openly gay and living on disability at the moment for mental health issues. And it seems like coming out of the closet as gay made life hard in some communities and made it easier in other communities. But I found the same bigotry and the same stuff happening as a disabled guy. And so I started speaking out about it because I'm like, you know, it's really weird as a white guy, experiencing bigotry is pretty rare. But when I'm treated like I'm less of a person, when I don't have a right to be heard, and when I don't have the same privileges of other people do, no matter what kind of effort I put forth, then I realize, okay, this is unfair treatment and I need to speak out about it. And I also realized that the way that mental illness in the media is portrayed is good and bad. And I like to use the Big Bang Theory and Young Sheldon as an example of doing a pretty good job about it. I think the first several seasons of the Big Bang Theory showed Sheldon Cooper as no more than just an annoyance and a character actor kind of stuck in this show to add a lot of comic relief. And then it started showing how much he suffered and how hard it was for others to get along with somebody who just never developed socially. And that's something that I can relate to, is never developing socially. And so as they wrapped up the Big Bang Theory and they wrapped up the second season of Young Sheldon, they really went in depth about what it's like to have friends and to not have friends, and to live with mental disorders. But first, I want to do a couple of musical numbers here. This is a medley of both theme songs. It was sad getting the theme song of the Big Bang Theory in this ballad form, so I might do it a little slower than the usual theme song. Our whole universe was in a hot, dense state. Then nearly 14 million years ago, expansion started. Wait. The earth began to cool, the autotrophs began to drool, Neanderthals developed tools, we built the wall, we built the pyramids, math, science, history, unraveling the mystery that all started with the Big Bang. Bang! Nobody else as strong as I am. Yesterday I moved a mountain. I bet I could be your hero. I am a mighty little man. I've done a couple other videos with this, and one I did this thing just to give sort of a gay perspective of the Big Bang Theory and all of the nerd lovers in the LGBT community. I did this fun with fag flags, for lack of a better term, and I showed my American gay flag, and it's almost Pride coming up here in a couple weeks, and it's 50 years since we've had Pride and Stonewall, and so I'm going to show my pride with my favorite part of the gay community, which is called the Bears, which is kind of the bigger, furrier, sometimes older people that have been kind of marginalized in the mainstream gay culture, especially in the 90s, and then bearish type gay guys were starting to say, hey, we're going to create our own thing, because the mainstream gay community seems to be favoring, you know, the young, skinny, pretty boys, and we're going to then favor us and then exclude everybody else, which is kind of what happens. So this is the bear paw flag, and instead of a rainbow, it's got kind of more earthy tones to it. So that is my fun with fag flags. And I want to give a shout out to Lance Berger. Speaking of gay stuff, he's wonderfully bearish, and I think he is, from my perspective, one of the sexiest men in television in my generation. And so I always enjoy seeing that character. I even enjoyed seeing Lance as playing the Leonard's bully, which I thought was a great character, and he stays the night over there one time. and that was a fun episode. But it's it's weird to be a fan of television because I've never really had an emotional connection with TV shows. I did when Breaking Bad ended, but I don't remember really crying like I did last week when The Big Bang Theory ended. I didn't quite expect it because my partner, he was Googling the final episode, and for some reason we thought it was going to be towards the end of the month, so they did this double episode, and then it ended, and I was like, but I was crying anyways, not realizing that it was the very end of the series. But it just showed the dynamics of not only what it's like to have a friend who is emotionally exhausting at times, who comes off as being selfish. However, everybody knew he had the right intentions because he never had the privilege of developing socially, and a lot of mentally ill people that have friends deal with that dynamic. Now, most of the time, when you do have a mentally ill person that isn't socially developed, typically we hang out with other people that are at the same functioning level. And it's been years since I felt like I had a friend who wasn't a peer. When I mean by a peer, somebody who is also mentally disabled or at the same functioning level. I like to put it in 3 different tiers. I like to think about people up here who suffer with anxiety and depression, but they're career people and they're family people, and they're in a whole different category. They need a different level of care. They have a whole different set of privileges. And then you have folks like me in the middle who I am high functioning enough to where I don't need a payee, I don't need 24/7 residential care and stuff like that. And then you guys at this level, and I hate to put this at the bottom, but I mean, really, these are the guys that are forgotten about, the ones that you rarely see out on the street, and if you do, maybe they're talking to themselves and they have nobody. And I like to view them as the way others view me that are up here, as sort of this, we're not going to listen to this person because we've already made up their mind, because they're crazy, whatever they say isn't going to be logical, so let's just smile and nod and pretend like we're listening and pretend like we're actually going to follow through and do something and then stab them in the back later. Something about the Big Bang Theory, and this isn't really realistic though, but there is a lot of conflict, and they seem to get over it pretty well. And that's something that I have noticed, especially West Coast urban culture, and a group of friends that accepts a mentally ill person for over a decade like that in California, in urban California, I think is almost virtually impossible from what I understand, because the culture in Southern California is kind of like a hyper version of the Pacific Northwest, of just this phoniness. And so if there were conflict, it would be behind my back. And that would be the reality, I think, of the Sheldon Cooper character, is that, you know, he would have a couple of friends in one season, and the next season, you know, the last season, they just, you know, would destroy his reputation without even talking to him or finding out what his motives are, just to say, well, he's just self-centered, and, you know, he's just, you know, criticizing everybody on purpose just because he hates people and he's mean. And so yes, it's fiction, it's fantasy, and yeah, it's hard when I see those scenes about how they're always trying to judge Sheldon's motives, but they typically come up with the conclusion that he means well. He just simply, no matter how much we try to talk to him and tell him how to behave like educated urban culture, he's never going to do it, but we're still going to try to preach at him and try to, you know, and it kind of reminds me of my life, except typically that kind of stuff happens behind my back. And, you know, before I know it, I'm walking to a room and everybody's treating me different. There's a whole different vibe there, and I don't know what was said behind my back. I don't know the details, but it's pretty obvious something has. And And when I've talked to colleagues and when I've talked to family, eventually it does come out that, okay, this was said about you, and nobody went to me first ahead of time, and stuff like that. So here's a really cool thing that I saw about last week's 2-hour fiesta of this Sheldon stuff. Was in Young Sheldon, they finally revealed, and they kind of hinted at this because the Sturgis character, Professor Sturgis, Dr. Sturgis, whatever, he was always kind of nutty, but he never had an actual mental breakdown episode that really qualified him as having a mental disability. But it was very touching when there was another staff member talking about this to Mima about, well, you didn't know. Yeah, everybody knows that he's mentally ill and that he has these episodes, and he ended up on the roof, and it was scary. But the way Mima handled it was the same way she would handle Sheldon, just sort of like, oh yeah, he's crazy and I love him. Not like I'm scared, not like I need to totally control him. I just need to just lovingly guide him somewhere. And that I thought was realistic, because the Mima character is a badass. She's very strong and very strong-willed and, hard-headed. And it seems like those are the kinds of people that can maintain relationships with folks that are high maintenance, because they're strong enough not to take things personally all the time. And Mima is the kind of person that she doesn't give a shit what people think about her. She's going to go to the casino and just be irresponsible and just drink and party and whatever at her age. And if anybody tells her anything else, she's just going to say, hey, fuck you. This is my life. And I've noticed that those are the types of personalities that can handle, and I hate to say difficult people, because I don't like to think about myself that way, although other people do, and I don't think that would be totally unfair from their perspective to say that. But I like to say high maintenance, because low functioning people need to have others at times compensate for their lack of functioning. And for instance, keeping me focused, and my priorities are totally off. That's one of the things about Sheldon, is that he has, well, for one thing, his opinions are usually different than everybody in the room. Science, and his particular branch of science is way up here, and everything else like sports is just totally insignificant. and in small town Texas, that's very unpopular. But even in the science community, his priorities are so different. For instance, when he won the Nobel Prize, and this was so great the way they portrayed this, was that he put more emphasis on him feeling safe, and him feeling safe was not too much change at once, and there was a lot of change going on at once. His wife looked different, she started acting different, they were going overseas, and people were making a big deal about him. He was nervous in front of all these crowds, and there was just a lot of change going on. And so instead of being happy that he just won the most prestigious prize in science, it was, I want to feel safe, I want to feel heard, and my reality matters, my priorities matter. And in crisis, because it triggered a crisis in that character, is that it made his priorities really out of whack. And I could relate to that. I've had really good things happen. In fact, in my life right now, there's a lot of good things going on, and I'm still suffering with depression because I don't feel safe. There's a lot of change going on, but it feels like I don't have an anchor, or like I'm underwater sort of, and I can't get up, and I need my creature comforts, and that could be a priority no matter how good life is. So I love the way they portrayed that, and I really hope they do some reunion episodes like they did. I just found out that one of my favorite shows that I've been binging on is The Waltons, And even though they ended, you know, after 9 seasons, they did these reunion movies from 1982 all the way to 1997. So I really hope they do something like that, although I don't think the Big Bang characters are ever going to make it to the big screen like the Star Trek characters did. Typically sitcoms don't do that. And who knows, there might be another spin-off. I don't know. It'd be really funny, and I keep thinking about how fun of a spin-off it would be to have Amy and Sheldon have kids and have the Shamey kids and have them be, you know, completely non-science, or maybe one would be totally geeky and the other one wouldn't, you know. But something about Sheldon's upbringing, which I could relate to, having a sibling who was very close in age, not twins, but somebody who was hyper social and hyper aware of what was going on, who was doing who was interested in who and why, and you know, just had these amazing antennas of social constructs and how complicated they are. Now science is complicated, and as much as I love science, I've never really officially studied it. My thing is, you know, creativity and music theory and stuff like that. And for me, it's simple. It's simple concepts I get. But when somebody says no to me without saying no, that is complicated to me, and I can't get anybody to understand that that's not my language. Subtle behavior, subtle hints, subtle language, if it's open to interpretation, I will pick my best logical interpretation. And if I don't hear the word no, then I get nervous because I don't know whether they're saying yes or no. And especially if I ask them and try to resolve it and stuff, eventually they get mad and say, I meant no, but they never said it. And those are really hard things for me. In fact, they make me scared, just because I grew up in this culture where we are more afraid to offend people than we are to lie. And I've noticed that with the way the show has Sheldon portrayed in this world where there's a lot of lying going on when he's older. But when he's younger, he's in this more conservative place where there's more emphasis on honesty, and I think that was portrayed very well. And so I find it, as somebody who is marginalized and who has suffered a lot of things behind my back, is that when I think that people are lying about me or to me, that's one of the most scariest things in my life, because I know how it ends, and I know that when it comes down to it, there are people that are heard when it comes to resolving conflict and people that are not heard. And if I admit that, yeah, I'm crazy and at times I'm even delusional, that doesn't disqualify the truth. It doesn't disqualify my experience and my feelings, and I need to be heard just as much as anybody else. It's just that we're accustomed to, in a lot of cultures, of saying like, okay, whatever's going to come out of this guy's mouth, I'm just going to filter it out. And I've decided ahead of time what I think of the matter, even though this person might even be stating facts. And I've noticed that I've been involved in some conflicts when it comes to business-related stuff. And I've realized that having hard evidence and proof and, you know, showing texts and emails and photos of things that aren't right doesn't matter when somebody is in a place of authority. They've already made up their mind. And that's a really scary place, not only for anybody in a place of conflict where they don't have a lot of power and authority and they don't have a voice, but for somebody who lives on disability is another thing too, because the stigma is that I'm actually a fully functioning person that's just pretending to be this way. And that's the biggest stigma that I have. And it would be absurd for somebody, you know, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, to pretend to be a crazy person in order for their life to be somehow better. If there's one thing you don't want to pretend to be, is mentally ill. that might change in, a couple generations, and I think things are. And that would actually be really funny if all these people just pretend to be this very low functioning mentally ill person in order to get attention and in order to get accommodations. But I want to say that when it comes to my career, I never have accommodations. When it comes to resolving conflict in situations, especially things that have to do with my illness, I never get accommodated. In fact, I'm vulnerable, and it scares me more. And so what really touched me was the end of Young Sheldon, was when he had this event and nobody showed up. And it just reminded me of when I was in high school. When I started high school, my friends started fizzling out. By the end of high school, I didn't have anybody I could call my friend. And so it was really sweet the way they showed Sheldon's friends, and they had these kid actors that just looked just like the adults, most of them. It was amazing, especially the kid that played young Amy. It was like, wow. And it was just hope that was like, okay, his friends are out there in the future somewhere, and just have hope that it's going to happen sometime. And that was really encouraging to me too, because that's always been a huge subject. Because when I was in high school was when I started losing my mind. I started losing friends, and I wasn't pushing people away on purpose. It was just I was losing my grip on reality, and I could no longer keep up with how complicated high school social constructs were, especially in this culture. And everything I did was counterproductive in order to be social. So I think the fact that Sheldon has friends that are higher functioning might be a little unrealistic, but the fact there was a lot of conflict and he resolved the conflict at the end of the show with that speech that he gave that was so touching, I think was really cool. And again, was it realistic from my perspective? I don't think so. But the way they portrayed it, and it was sort of like this could give hope when it comes to understanding mentally ill people, forgiving them, and having everything out in the open, I thought was really touching. And I think for that, I think they did a great job. And overall, yes, it's probably the best thing that is probably the best thing that's ever had a laugh track before, maybe besides MASH. But most shows that have a laugh track, I'm not interested in. And shows, they come and go like crazy, and they're so shitty. And so it was great to have a show like that, and it'd be interesting to see how season 3 of Young Sheldon is. And apparently they're going to kill off Sheldon's dad, and that's going to be sad. So we'll see what season they do that. Or I think he divorces. I can't remember the whole backstory, but anyways, they do mention that in Big Bang Theory. So anyways, I will hopefully do some more of these when it comes to the media and how they portray the mentally ill people, especially those two shows.